Hi, and welcome to the mental health madness that is the Man Myth Podcast. I am your host, Bobby.
And I am your other host, Pop.
Tonight we have a special episode with special guest, Samantha Bay. Samantha,
Hello.
introduce yourself and tell them what you do.
Hello, my name is Samantha Bay, and my day job is actually Peruvian art. I'm actually an operations assistant, and which is just wholesale and distribution for an art company. I ship art all over the country. And before, actually, when I lived in Kentucky, I worked for an apparel company there as well. So I've done wholesale art and distributions a majority of my career as my day job, but I also crochet and have my own design line as well. So make jewelry, that kind of stuff as well. Do shark's teeth and necklaces, do sewing. I've done seamstress type work and things like that for like 20 years as well on the side.
That's your day job?
The side hustle, I guess you'd call it, is the design work. I do that more for fun. So yeah, I do like little markets now and things like that here in Florida where I live now. So I do those kind of, just they're a little more for fun here, but I've done kids costumes when my kids were born. That's when I really started taking it off. So I would make like monkeys and frogs and bears. I mean, you name it. So I just started making costumes, and then I started doing hats and scarves and all that other stuff too. So all that stuff. But yes, my day job is wholesale art and operations for an art company.
And you guys manufacture the art?
The owner of the company, she's actually from Peru. And so they do ship it in directly from Peru. Yes. So that comes in on freight. And then I am the one who checks in every piece and keeps track of every single piece in the warehouse. Every day, day-to-day operations, UPS, shipping, receiving, all that kind of stuff. All that good stuff.
She's like the Santa Claus of Peruvian art.
I literally am one of Santa's elves. Yes, I absolutely do. And it's a lot of hand-carved gourds, if you guys are familiar with that. It's all, I've probably even, actually, here's one right here. This kind of stuff, like little trinkets, things like that.
It's your boss, Santa Claus.
Yeah.
It is Santa Claus.
It is. And then, and this is actually one we have as well. This is a carved alabaster. It's a nativity scene, but they're all like masters in their craft. Some of them are very well renowned and throughout Peru as well. Yeah. So it's a very honorable company to work for. They're fair trade, all that kind of stuff. So they just turned 25. The company did. I've worked for them for 3 years full time. So yeah, that's it.
Fancy schmancy.
I think so. I enjoy it.
That's all that matters.
Yeah, it's a lot of boxes in a warehouse. It's just me and a lady in a warehouse, but we love it. And we play Christmas music, and I play a bunch of podcasts that she gets annoyed with.
That sounds about right.
Yep.
That's what I don't have anybody that works with me, so it's perfect to do whatever I want.
Love it. I love it. Yeah. And I can bring my kids to work with me, which is a huge plus.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Definitely.
All right, Dad, start us off on this quest of knowledge today.
So one of the things that, and we talked about, we've talked before, one of the things we talked about is how you also work with people in consulting and helping them get through traumas and different life situations, let's say.
That's right.
One of the things when we were talking, it was about how there's a point, and one of the things about our podcast is we like to give people tools to deal with things, and not the stuff that they were taught to do.
Tools in the tool belt.
Tools to go to that little fork in the road, right? Which we call for this episode is either go to victim or go to victor. And how, like, I do the same thing with people. I just got off of the call, but I want to get the way you see it, some of your ideas. Well, Bobby will throw in some of his, because Bobby's like in the trenches in a lot of ways. So, he's kind of been there.
In the valley? Are you in the valley, Bobby?
I think different generations also handle it different. So I think the uniqueness of all the different generations here will help people see that.
I do.
I'm
Yeah.
sure as shit not counseling anybody.
Yeah,
That's for fucking sure.
Right. Exactly. I do think it's important to note also that Bobby and I have known each other since we were like 12 years old. So Bobby and I do go way back for people that may not know that. There may be some people that obviously that are local friends from Kentucky. I don't live in Kentucky anymore, and neither does Bobby, but Bobby and I met at a very young age. And so we've known each other for which is like we've known each other for like 5 years. But we've known each other for some time. So that's, he talks about
you guys
generations.
just left me
and
in
I'm like,
Kentucky.
Yeah, we did.
No, you just stayed in Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I do actually, since I moved away, from Kentucky, I moved away in 2019, but I was raised in Kentucky, and, it was something, that's for sure. And it wasn't, it was a little confusing at times and things like that. So through my childhood that I had, and it was mostly the people that were around me and my family, we had some family dynamics and things that were a little, hard to understand at my age when I was young. So until I became an adult and had my own kids and things like that, that I start digging deeper into traumas and understanding things that happened and just verbalizing it. There were so many things that happened in my childhood that I couldn't verbalize and I didn't understand. And I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing in my adult life, and as in my early stages of motherhood, that I was like, something just didn't feel right. Like I have actually the podcast where you guys talk about the voices that you hear, which don't necessarily, they're not saying anything, but as you're going through, what I'll say is my white picket fence stage, is what I call it, when I was married. Um, to my kid's father, and I was going through all the motions of the things that you're supposed to do as a parent, but something within me was just not right, and I could feel it. So that's where, I did delve deep into helping other people, and I started kind of counseling, kind of doing like a big sister type thing. I worked in a lot of restaurants throughout my career, kind of part-time as well, bartending, and is kind of like being a therapist as well. You end up counseling a lot of people on a lot of bar stools in your life. So I've done that, my fair share of that too. And then, of course, after I had children, they were also in high chairs drinking out of a bottle, and they were very cranky, just like drunk adults. So I make that joke that there's not much difference, really.
Just less swearing.
Sometimes they have accidents, they you try to put them to bed and they keep getting back up out of bed like 4 times, saying they're hungry and things like that. Children and drunk adults have a lot in common. So it came to that point where and I know you guys are veterans as well. I have a lot of family members that are veterans. And even my older sister is a veteran. She was a veteran as well. But she actually my older sister passed of a drug overdose in 2020. Right before COVID. Everybody kind of thought it was COVID, but it was drugs, 100%. So she overdosed. But she had a real bad problem. My older sister did when I was growing up, as well. She's about 5 years older than me. So, like you guys have also lost people, in those kinds of situations as well. And it was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back when I was like, okay, why do people, go to those places? Why, what, how is it that they either take that fork in the road, where it says, hey, victim, or, or am I going to like trying to shake it off and go against the grain? And, you end up being the victor. But it's interesting because there's several times where I have come across people that think they're being the victor, but through their actions, and someone who has dealt with a lot of nonverbal and early education through children and things like that. So I've dealt with a lot of tantrums and things like that. So you see people who think they're being the victor, but you end up seeing that they are actually just a broken child themselves that is actually feels, and essentially they are a broken victim inside as well. So they may be doing something that they think is a good thing. Like I have experience with narcissism. My first husband, my kid's father, is a narcissist, and I did not realize what one was until you're with one. But and there's other members of my family and stuff as well that I've known as with the same affliction, and a lot of times they play through the room like they're the victor, like, oh, look what I did. Look at this great thing, like, look, oh, this is so great, right? You know, but with narcissists, at least in my experience, they end up, the whole reason of their actions, they're actually hurting people through this victory that they're creating, but it's sad though, because I end up seeing them as the broken child that they really are, because unfortunately I've noticed that generational trauma tends to have a lot to do with it. And things like that. I was raised by a few different people that had immense generational trauma. Their family members, abused them, whether sexually or otherwise, back in the 60s. I'm talking the 60s. I was raised by people that were born in the 60s. Pops, I think you're about there. So it was a very different time. So obviously Bobby and I grew up in the 90s, and that was, I actually have been saying this for some time, because my children obviously have always known the internet. And I think Bobby and I call ourselves the last of the unplugged age, like before we're constantly plugged in. And it was just like the wild, wild west back in the day. So there was so much more that we didn't talk about, that we didn't understand. We just were kind of children that were victimized in some way, and then it ends up being something that you're not taught to deal with. So you push it down, and then you start drinking alcohol or doing anything you do to consume to cover up those things, because you were victimized. And then as you're in your adult life, you end up playing what seems on the outside as victor, but it actually is a broken victim. So that's why when you brought up the topic, I was like, ooh, let's get into that one. It's a very, like, it's a fork in the road, but it also can change throughout your individual path as well. Sometimes you're playing the pawn, and sometimes you're playing the king in a pawn game, or a chess game or something too. If that makes sense, like a chess game.
I think some of it has. When you were talking about it, it reminded me of Bobby in some ways, because when he was dealing with his depression and all the stuff that was going on, he was in the mode where he got to the point where everybody thought he was funny and okay and drink, he was doing the drinking and stuff like that. That's not really the victor that we're looking for. That's an amplification of the victim. It's also it's also a cry for help, but we don't, in our society, we don't get that.
Right.
And I think Bobby talks about it really well in how he felt and how he saw people see him, let's say. Right. And everybody was like, oh yeah, he's the goofball, he's the guy. But underneath, he had this underlying depression and anxiety and stuff that he was dealing with. And Bobby knows. I saw a video of NF, and they were dogging him out, and they were like, we've never heard you freestyle. And he did, but when he freestyled, it was just as good as anything else he did. But he was talking about how he drowns that pain with alcohol.
Yeah.
Or how he did. And so go ahead and talk about some of your, and it's not just one fork in the road.
No, not at all. And that's never sometimes
it's just all these branches that you can continually go one way or the other.
Exactly. And sometimes they come to a dead end and you have to go back, and like Bobby talked about depression. I actually heard a medium that I was listening to on a podcast recently that said something that actually stuck me, and it was something I'd never heard it described that way before, but it helps me a lot more understanding anxiety and depression and the difference. And she said that when you're anxious, you're worried about the future. When you're depressed, you're worried about the past. You're upset about the past. And I was like, oh, that kind of put it on a new spin for me, because I have so much of both, but I didn't understand, like, oh, why do I have anxiety? It was because I was worried about the unpredictable, the way that I was going down that path. I get worried about not knowing what that path will bring. I used to get anxious about not being able to control it, because everything in my life was controlled up until I was about 30 years old. And you guys talk about the depression too, and it eats at you. That's for sure. And there's a very heavy burden, with that too. I grew up at a young age, which is what they say, but I've learned that I'm pretty sure that is code now for my childhood was taken from me. Like, because you really very much I at a young age was really, and I've had this discussion with my father. I love him very much, and I always will, and he knows I love him, but we do not talk. He was he was in the army, and he raised me very militantly, and like we just didn't talk about feelings, or anything, period. It was just like, well, here's the roof over your head, and here's the bed, and there's the fridge, and I did my job, and God love him, but that's just where he was. So we just never talked about those kinds of things. And so the depression and the anxiety are hard to balance. And I never actually felt like taking my own life. Most of my life actually, but just about 3 years ago it got pretty bad. I went through a terrible legal custody battle, and my kids actually were taken from me for about 9 months, and it was like in the blink of an eye, that they were gone. I literally just kissed them goodbye on a Thursday morning and didn't see them for 9 months, and it was the hardest time of my life. And I will admit I was very close to taking my own life too. I had never wanted to be dead before. I had never even verbalized it until my kids were taken from me. And that was the greatest fear in my life. And I was on cloud nine. I was actually COVID, like you guys mentioned in an episode about how COVID can take you one way or the other. It was either, you said either people did awesome or they were terrible at it. And I was doing really great, and I was on cloud nine.
Oops, we lost her. Yeah, can you come back down from
You're on cloud nine? You're on cloud nine.
I'm back on. Are we there?
Yeah.
I was on cloud nine. On cloud nine. And then just like that, though, you guys are talking about the paths that we take, and I was just happy as a lamb. And literally it switched like a light switch, and all of a sudden within literally days, my whole life changed, and I even am getting, anxious just talking about it, because it still is that much of a sore spot for me, that it was so bad that, my kids were taken from me. What else is there? But yeah, I had that path, and I thought I had it all, and I was invincible. And this is actually the first time I've spoken openly about it, in that regard. But it's been very healing for me, because I have nothing to hide, but I was made to believe I did for a long time, and that I couldn't speak out about wrongfully being accused of certain things. And I was made to look like I was, a criminal. And it turned out I was just being used as a pawn in a big game. And I ended up being the victim, and my children end up being the victim. And through all of it, through somebody trying to look like the victor, which is very interesting.
which is the worst thing. Like,
yeah.
We all have kids. Obviously my dad had a kid.
At least,
but like we all have kids.
Yeah.
And I don't get to see my oldest son every day or all the time. Like, I don't like going 2 weeks without seeing him, or sometimes it's a month, because he's at that age where, I don't want to come over this weekend. All right, bud, we're not going to force you. You know what I mean? And it has taken a long time, but his mother and I have a great relationship. We are in each other's lives. We're not like just leaving anybody out. So, and a lot of people say like, well, how does that work? Like, how do you guys make it work? And we're like, because it's only about Xander.
Right.
Like, that's all it's about. As long as he's happy, that's all we care about. And I mean, we've babysat her 3-year-old. He comes over to our house, her other, like we've had all her kids at one time. She's had all our kids at one time. Like, there's never any worry about it.
That's awesome.
But the problem, like, I couldn't imagine in my mental state where I was a few years ago, and just thinking about like having all of my kids taken away from me.
Yeah, not one. My son is going on 12 years old.
Right.
My daughter just turned 10. So,
right. But I'm saying, like, I have 4 now. Like, I can't imagine going 9 months. I don't like going 9 hours without seeing them.
Not a phone call, not nothing.
Yeah, it's just sad when kids get put in the middle of things.
Yeah.
And like you said, they get played like pawns.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of thinking of the victim or the victor, it reminds me of what Harvey Dent says in the Dark Knight, where he says, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Yeah.
Because you said just because someone's a victor doesn't mean they're the hero of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if that they've won. It just means that that's what they think they are.
Mm-hmm. And it can be a matter of what they have in their own mind. You know what I'm saying? They convince themselves sometimes of these things. And I have just looked some of them in the eyes and I'm like, you actually believe yourself, you know, like it's your truth, you know, it's your reality and you're living in it. But all of us are out here looking at you going a little confused, you know.
Well, and that's such a villainous way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Look at every good villain. And I've said this, this is how, I don't know why I'm on this podcast with you two right now. You're talking about generational trauma and healing, and I'm talking, well, this happened on the comic books.
Batman.
I
love it.
But every good villain has had their own code and their own reasons for doing things that they think they're virtuous for doing. They think they're in the right. And so often it translates into real life, and you don't realize until you're like learning, like until you start learning about this mental health and doing all this stuff, that you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't just writing stuff down to be funny. Like he's serious.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy how often they overlap.
Right. And that's where I think I was a child of divorce, and my parents had both several marriages between the two of them, you know, and they were divorced when I was 4. And so I grew up, you know, kind of one hand or another. It didn't matter. And so, but now I'm also a parent of divorce. And that's where I, now having seen and trying to be the mother that I never got to have, which I don't know if you even knew that, Bobby, but I actually grew up with my stepmother, and I didn't see my birth mother, and I did not see each other between the ages of 4, and I didn't meet her again until I was 30. So
yeah, see, I didn't know that. You told me that I think you said something about that the other day, but I didn't know that when we were growing up. I thought that was just your mom.
A lot of people didn't. Nobody really did. And I was not allowed to even ask about my birth mother. She just literally disappeared like a fart in the wind when I was 5 years old, somewhere around there. But once I reconnected with her, and then once I became an adult and started asking questions to my parents, I got more answers. So with that, then now being on the other side of the fence as a parent myself with children of divorce, and I see those characteristics developing in my children the same way my parents, you know, had this generational trauma that they then could not get past, you know, that they ended up taking out on me, you know, when I was a child. Like, I'm not, you know, I love my parents very much. They, you know, could call right now, but it wasn't good when I was growing up. It was terrible. You know what I'm saying? Like, of course I had a roof over my head and all that, you know, but it wasn't like, I hated living there. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at the table, and I was like, I hate my life. I hate this.
Right.
You know, and it was a constant screaming and anger and that kind of thing. So, but then digging through the generational trauma, you see why that anger was there is because they were abused as kids too and things like that. So, you know, they were used as pawns. These were adults, children trying to raise children. So then now here I am on the other side dealing with adults that are using their kids as pawns, and I see it, and I'm, you know, that's what kind of was a catalyst. Like you've talked about how your kids kind of saved your life, and they're kind of that. I consider my kids actually like my twin flame, because it's because of them that I'm pushing myself to be the best version of myself. I'm pushing myself to love myself, to give forgiveness and grace to myself, because if I don't, and I don't lead by example, you know what I mean? My parents were always like, yeah, love yourself, do this, but they didn't show me that. They didn't, you know, exercise or do any self-care or anything like that. And it showed. So therefore that's where the generational thing comes in. I see it starting with my children again. And I want to try to break that cycle and help people understand where to identify it and how to identify it. And, you know, just because this is happening for now does not mean it's forever. You know, my kids always get stuck in that victim mindset. My kids very much do now. I don't know about your kids, Bobby. I know our kids are about the same age, but my kids will be like, oh, I can't do this. I'm terrible at it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you are now. Everybody was bad in the beginning when they started. I was like, you didn't know how to eat with a fork, but look at you go now. You know?
Yeah, you used to not have to talk. Now you won't shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Yeah, you used to sleep all the time. Now look at you walking on your legs, you know?
Yeah.
You
Like,
got somewhere,
right.
you know?
Yeah, Xander is probably the worst at that out of my kids. Grayson is the polar opposite. There's and crazy to say, there's not something he's really tried that he hasn't been able to at least do somewhat well.
Right.
I mean, even just this past couple of years looking at baseball, he played t-ball and then didn't play baseball until last year. And he started playing baseball, and they're like, "Oh, where's he been playing?" I was like, "He hasn't been playing."
Right.
They're like, "He hasn't been playing baseball with people." I was like, "Nope, just playing catch with me." They're like, "Oh man, he's gonna be good if he keeps at it." Swimming, his swim coach wanted him to do swimming year round because he thought he could be but Grayson didn't enjoy swimming.
Right.
That's the problem. I'm not gonna make him do something he doesn't enjoy doing.
Right.
All
Just
year
because they're
round.
good at it doesn't mean they want to do it
Correct.
all the time. You know, I loved running, and they were like, "Why don't you be on track and field?" And I was like, "Because I don't want to," but I did eventually. But I didn't really like it.
I was going to say, I thought you were on track and field.
I did, but I didn't do it for me. I did it so they would like me, and they would pay more attention to me.
Right.
And so that's where I realized a lot of my childhood was to me taking the path that I thought somebody wanted me to have that would make me victorious, instead of them encouraging me to take the path that I wanted. So, you know, I would end up being victorious in my own way.
That's like dealing with, because I was like, great. There was nothing that I didn't try that I wasn't, but I got bored with it if it wasn't something I wanted to do for me.
Right.
But it also was in that sense of, I got attention for the wrong reasons. Like all of a sudden it's like, and you also lost attention if you didn't win.
Yeah.
And I think in this part of the thing we're doing with this podcast is letting people start to be who they are. And like, if I had the support of, like Bobby gives Gray, is just saying, try it. Yeah, you're good at it, but if you don't like it, don't do it.
Right.
It's not like living vicariously was one of the things I think that my parents did, because they didn't have that much. We didn't have much, but I was like an athlete.
Right.
And so I got kind of pushed into doing things that I didn't want to do. Now, that also sets up the family dynamic, because Rhonda, my sister, didn't get the attention a lot of times unless she was doing something that was, in essence, sports related.
Right.
So she did the flags, you know, that kind of thing. And then she started getting a little bit, but it wasn't the same thing, because it wasn't, my dad wasn't living vicariously through her. Right. And it was, what he lost in his childhood, he was trying to live through me in a lot of ways.
Right.
And
it's hard to identify and like not do that, to be honest. I'm like, oh, here's this thing. It's awesome. It's great. My son's like, go away. I know. I don't want that. Like, you know,
but it wasn't even the fact that I was asking. It was just like, that's what I was pushed. That's what I was pushing myself to do, just to be seen or heard in the family.
Right.
And, you know, when you get a certain place, like Gray does a great, you know, he strikes a couple of people out, he gets a couple of good hits, he goes home, and it's like, yeah, you did a great job, but it's not like, I'm not going to pay any attention if you don't get strikes the next time.
Right.
And I think that's, even though it wasn't said, it's just kind of how it was. And I don't think they knew any better. It was just kind of how they were doing things.
Yeah. Like, that's what I got all the time. They're just like, because I said so. They're like, I don't know, you just do it. Like, those were the answers I always got as a kid. There's a meme that I saw.
They didn't know why.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah. They had no reasoning. They're just like, I don't know, this is what we do. And I'm like, huh? And I was like the weirdo, because I was questioning things. Like, I don't know, I think I could do this. Like, and, you know, I unfortunately there was a lot of mental abuse that went along with my parents. And then therefore it came down to me, so like being an adult now, I'm like, some of the things that I recall were said to me as a child, I'm like, you know what I mean? That is way out of line to say that to a child, but the reason they did is because they were obviously victimized and, by their parents and stuff like that. So, they didn't amount to anything because they didn't have any self-worth, so therefore, it would turned out that every time I wanted to try to do something to go on my own path, all I got was criticized. Nothing was ever like, oh, that's awesome, congratulations. I don't know. Did you go to Berea's prom, Bobby? Because we're in the same grade. So did you go to like the proms? Did you ever go to prom?
I don't think I went to a Berea prom.
No. Well,
No.
I was prom queen. But I actually had, and so I was the stepdaughter, you know what I'm saying? I lived with my birth father and my stepmother. And then my younger sisters were, my birth mother, my stepmothers, you know what I'm saying? We had different moms. So I go back to the prom queen thing. It was amazing. And it was like the coolest thing I'd ever done in my life at that time. Right. I was just like, what? And I had to go home and I had to wake my parents up out of bed to tell them. And they were like, oh, all right. Cool.
Yeah.
I was like, I got the crown. I got everything, I got the roses, nothing, crickets. All right. I'm going back to bed. I was like, okay. So yeah, you think you do what, yeah, they didn't really show up unless it was something that I did, but it was only something they suggested.
Right. Well, and I kind of went the other way because I used to love golfing. Mm-hmm. And Dad and I would go. I mean, when did I start golfing, Dad? 7 or 8. We started golfing. Mm-hmm. And when my parents split up, I'd still golf with Dad, but it was a different experience. And then I just quit golfing altogether. I don't know, what is I, 17, 18? And I just quit golfing. Even though I loved it, mm-hmm. I had such animosity towards my dad.
That you gave it up.
That I gave it up.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this, Dad, but Dad and I didn't talk for 2 or 3 years. And it was all, it wasn't anything he did. Mm-hmm. It was all, I was literally just me being like a asshole I was confused. I was angry. Mm-hmm. I was sad, but I didn't know how to handle any of these emotions one-on-one, let alone feeling them all at the same time.
And verbalizing them to your parents.
And no offense to Dad, but I didn't think he'd listen.
Right.
Which I was completely wrong about. And this is why you need to talk to your parents because they will. So this is all it's all such a good thing because I wish we could have that time back, but I think when I went back and when we started getting in communication again, I think it's made us stronger and had our bonds better now because we both understand each other a little bit better. Right. We had to have that hard conversation because you can't just, I could have, and Dad would have been fine with it, but it wasn't just like oh, hey, how you doing, Dad? I know it's been 3 years. Love you. It wasn't that kind of conversation. We had a lot of difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And it could have been that conversation.
Right. If I had said that to Dad, he would not have brought up, it wouldn't have had anything. He would have just been happy. Right. He still sent Christmas cards and letters and stuff like that. But
right.
A lot of it, it's while I was in the military, so I was far away anyway. But when I was in the Navy after I turned 21, because I didn't drink from the time I joined the Navy, I didn't drink until I was 21 because I saw too many guys get in trouble for underage drinking. Yeah. I was just I'm not doing it. I'll be DD for all these kids that want to go drink, and I'll still have fun. I don't need to be drunk to have fun. And then I started drinking, and then drinking, depression, anxiety, unresolved childhood trauma just makes it so that you realize, oh, this is going to be dangerous. I probably shouldn't drink, but I have a lot more fun and my brain quiets down when I drink.
Yeah.
So then you get this whole, it's just this vicious circle of hate, self-hate, and then your mind's numb, and then you hate yourself because you're drinking all the time, and it's just this, it just adds on to it.
And then you eat a greasy cheeseburger at 3 a.m.
Listen, I still eat greasy cheeseburgers. Don't talk shit, okay?
I do too. But they're just so much more delicious after a few drinks.
Right. But I can't, I don't miss drinking at all now, but I've also in such a better headspace that I have a lot more fun.
Right.
I'll tell you what's the most fun thing ever is when you're with a group of adults that have kids, like all of the parents have kids, and they're asking if you can be the taxi home because they all forgot to get a DD.
Yeah.
Or they're going to Uber.
Yeah.
And
they're like, can you step by my house?
Hammered people that don't realize that you're even sober is the most fun I can have without having to pay money.
That's
because
like bartending.
It's the best thing in the world.
Paid. It's like bartending. They think I'm not listening, and I'm like, that unbeknownst to them, I've actually washed this dish 7 times. You know, definitely bartender, like bartender's confessional. That's a thing for sure. I have some stories. You'd be surprised how many people have cried in my lap.
So I tell people, I say, there's 3 people you can't lie to: your chiropractor, your hairdresser, and the bartender.
Yep.
The people that you just, because it's just like it, you just know, and you hear the stuff. But it was one of the things that was funny was Rhonda, my sister, recently we were talking about we were left in a terrible situation when she was 1, I was 3, and we eventually got into foster care because she talked to my aunts and they'd like, we didn't know what happened to you. Some of them knew what happened to us, but this is 50 years later, she's having a conversation with them. And they were like, we wanted to apologize, but we didn't know how to do it. And it was like, just apologize. Say what you feel. Don't hold on to that. See, like when you were doing with the kids, you kind of tried to put yourself in the victim mode, but you stuck with it and in essence became the victor. And sometimes it isn't a fork in the road. Sometimes it's just the same thing that gets shoved down your throat, and it's how you handle it. You make your own fork in the road. Yeah. And, going through that, I can't imagine. I'd probably be doing 3 to 5 if I wouldn't have seen him for 3 to 5 if that had happened to me. But
it definitely was very much a test of the will on the inside. You know what I mean? Like,
see how you handled it and how your relationship with your kids now, how it's probably a ton stronger. How much more do you appreciate them?
The little things,
right. And, Bobby says he wasn't communicating for 2 to 3 years. He was, by not communicating.
Yeah, he was saying something because
I gave him that space for him to come to me because I still loved him. Right.
But he didn't love himself.
Right. And in that process, he didn't lose 2 years with me. He gained 2 years with himself. And that's a beautiful way to look at it. That process is, and how did he handle it? He did some things that he probably shouldn't have been doing, but look where he is now. And look at the example, when we talk about this whole victor thing, being a victim isn't wrong. And sometimes you can't tell the difference between the two because like we said, it depends on who's looking at it. Like whoever took your kids away thought they were the victor, but actually in the long run, they're going to be the victim.
Yeah. It was the craziest thing. And it was a legal situation too. So until, when people think they know the court system until you actually go through it, and it turns out you don't know a great lawyer until you need one.
Well, it's not a justice system. It's a legal system.
It's a legal system.
There's no justice to it.
No. But yeah, it was so many people thought that they were the victor and that I was the criminal, but now people are actually coming back to me now. It's been almost 3 years and they're like, whoa, because Sarasota is a big, small town, so when it happened, it was hard for me to hide. Like I would see people at the grocery store that knew what happened, and things like that. So it was very much something that I couldn't hide from either. Like I would get anxiety just driving by the police station, which I had to drive past for my job, like every day. You know what I'm saying? It got me fearing cops. It got me terrified that they were watching me and that I couldn't, I mean, it got me questioning my sanity, to a certain extent, and you're just like, what? And, but yeah, like you say, they think they're being the victor, but here I am, an innocent person, questioning everything. And I'm like, well, am I the perpetrator? Am I this criminal? You get in your own head about it,
Mm-hmm.
And you get to worry about how you can't even stand your own ground against the legal system, because it doesn't even matter what you say. So you just want to bend over and lay down, and give up, and it seems, and unfortunately, that's kind of what happened with my mothers, is that they, my birth mother and I actually have not spoken in going on 3 years right now, probably maybe a little bit longer. But it's because she was mentally abused by her late husband. He actually has passed away now, but he was a raging alcoholic, and they never had any. He did not like me. I remember actually being like 4 years old. And do you ever just have an energy when you're really young that it's just you just don't feel right? You just know that the energy is wrong. Yeah, I knew at a young age that man did not like me. So that's why part of the reason why I went without my mother is because my stepfather that she married, he started mentally abusing her in a very narcissistic way, very similar to what happened with me in my marriage. And I was isolated from everybody, my family. I didn't have Facebook. I wasn't allowed to go out. You know what I'm saying? I didn't have a debit card. I didn't have any freedom. I didn't have no iPhone or nothing really. Like, when this is when I got married to him was in 2010. So this isn't a long time ago, but the same thing happened with my birth mother that happened to me. And so she got her kids taken away, and she was being mentally abused by a guy at the time that she just succumbed and she laid down and took it, and she's still alive. Yeah. But when my sister died a few years ago, she started blaming herself. Really bad. I mean, because she couldn't be there, because she doesn't love herself enough to just be there for the child. Like you're talking about giving him space for that. So you welcomed him with open arms when he did come back to you. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm getting at, is that when I reconnected with my birth mother, there were no open arms. She was just so confused. She still doesn't know what to do. And she blames herself for my sister's death. So that's why she thinks she's just going to ruin my life as she's in it. So I'm the child, but I feel sorry for her, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? I sympathize for her, and I wish she
That's
was
also
strong
her
enough to
way
love
of
herself.
staying in the family.
What's that?
That's also her way of staying in the mother mode, is taking the responsibility for that death.
Yeah.
When she really didn't have anything to do with it.
No.
In a
And
lot
that's
of
kind of
ways.
her point, though, is that she didn't call her, she didn't push to be a part of her life, But I mean, my sister was addicted to meth. So this is not like a very lighthearted drug addict either. The last time I saw her actually was when I was 22, because I didn't see her either. My sister was about 5 years older than me, right? So I'm about 3, she's about 8, somewhere in there, young. And we literally just also disappeared from each other. And she went to live with my grandparents. My birth mother went to marry another guy. And then my dad just got remarried within a year. And he was like, this is your mom now. Literally that was it. He was just like, oh, it's like like just get a new Barbie. It didn't even matter. Insert mom here. And I mean, I love him for, trying to do his best at the time. And I love my stepmother too. They are still married to this day. And I will always love and respect her for being there for my father. You know what I'm saying? But the upbringing that we was just so strained because of that when, my birth mother just gave up pretty much. Yeah. And she just doesn't, but that doesn't mean that I have to do it.
Right.
Well, and that's it, tying this all together is staying the victim, in essence, doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
The victors, when you and Bobby are in the midst of changing the family dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And that will, Bobby and I talked about this. My grandpa was, in essence, a terrible person. My dad was my dad. And I think I did a better job, but with the tools I had, he's doing a better job than I did.
Right.
In a lot of ways.
We're getting better, a little bit better each generation, kind of,
So instead of just, and part of the stepping back and letting them do their making their mistakes and not having to be the judge and jury for them, right? I was hard enough on myself, and Bobby was too. You probably were too, that we didn't need that extra cheerleading section on that side. Right.
Doesn't mean I don't like it though. You know what I mean? It's still nice to hear it.
But it's
I don't need applause, but I like an
like
applause.
It's like the opponents applauding for you. They'd be like, I want my home group back here to be on my side, not But yeah, there is the cheerleading and there is the stuff, but it's not pushing that energy onto you. It's just like celebrating you instead of celebrating me through Bobby.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, it's difficult to navigate through, but I do write poetry a lot, and journaling is something that has helped me through a lot of like verbalizing things, and I'm a pen to paper kind of girl, so I always have it with me, and I write a lot of poems, and I had wrote a whole poem about this particular trauma, like figuring out what happened with my parents and things like that. And I wrote that I wanted to bring forward forgiveness for the future, if that makes sense, and understanding. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't paraphrase it, but there'll be more posting of poetry in the next year as well. But a lot of my poetry is based off these things that we go through, and I try to paint it in a light that maybe helps people understand it a bit better. It's really, it's hard to even put it into words. There were so many times that things happened and I just was like, why can't I talk? Why am I turning red? Why am I sweaty palms? Why I'm a very conflict avoidant kind of person, so I don't like when people argue. I'm like, stop. Why can't we just be nice? But but that didn't mean that we couldn't have a conversation like you and Bobby have done. You know what I'm saying? Like you guys were able just to talk. And that is something that I'm finally getting to that point where I can have these conversations with these family members that I had a really tough time with, but now I can put peace to it, and I see them for their true colors and what they really, came from, which is most of them were victims. And I don't feel like a victim anymore. I feel like I was victimized, definitely, but I don't feel like a victim anymore. And I have peace within what I am and what I've done. And I don't hide from it. Like people definitely ask me about those things still. And I'm like, yeah, you want to sit down and have a chat? Like, we can start the clock right now. That's fine. I'm a therapist now for people, like it got to where what I've been through, it turns out a lot more people like, and Bobby and I reconnected kind of because of that, because of your son, Bobby, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that alienation and those kinds of things, those victims, I get to the point where I feel like I can carry a larger burden than most. And I think that's what moms in general, we feel like. All of us feel like an atlas, you know what I'm saying? Even Ashley, just with her hysterectomy and things like that, I get it. I've been there, and it shocks me actually what I've dealt with and what I've done. Like I feel like I've lived 1,000 lives already. I actually went to college and put myself through college while I had 2 kids. You know what I mean? I graduated 10 weeks after I gave birth to my daughter, and I'm like, in retrospect, that's crazy. I can't believe I did that. But now I'm at the point where I've done all those things, and I've laid a foundation that has like guaranteed that I'll always have a safe place to live. I'll always have a career. I'm very solid within my foundation. And so that's where now, like, but that foundation needs a little like reglazing, for some emotional reglazing, if you will.
Well, and part of that's doing it for you, finding your support instead of just supporting everybody else.
Exactly.
And finding that group or that crew that's just, and it doesn't have to be somebody that's like we talked about the cheerleaders. It's just somebody that's like right there in your corner.
Well, and that was a big thing too, because when something like that happens within your family, and it's not like it was a death in the family or something like that. It was like accusations and things like, I was accused of child neglect, so that's, how do you preach that to people and say, hey, no, I promise, like, I'm a good person, and it's so easy just to brush it off like, oh, so I had to own it and I had to be honest about it. But I wear that, what's that book that we read in like 4th grade or whatever it's called, the Scarlet Letter,
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, it's a letter and it's a badge that she has to wear. I mean, adultery happens to be the thing that she committed, but child neglect, let's admit it, is probably just as bad.
Right.
You know,
Well, and that's just the metaphor. It's not. It doesn't.
exactly.
Like, it's for every mistake or
Every scarlet
accusation,
letter.
everything.
Yeah. So it's a badge that I've learned to honor, though, and turns out I look good in some embroidered wear. Yeah, for sure.
All right, you ready to wrap it up, Bobby?
Yeah, I'm down.
It's been amazing.
It's been it was a great one. I guess we'll have to have her back on.
Yeah, we got a lot more to talk about.
We do, Dad.
I'm not coming next time. You guys do your own thing.
Bobby's like, I want to take a nap.
You're just here for the cuteness, buddy.
Just brings the jokes.
Yeah, I like that you were just one last thing, but you were talking about your poetry and you have to write stuff down.
Yeah.
And that's like a cathartic experience. And that's what I do with my stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I make jokes about the hardest parts of my life. Like I literally just yesterday told a joke not only about Ash's cancer, but
yes, you did. I heard it.
Also about having to put our dog down.
Yes.
And it's literally how once I tell the jokes, especially if they get a laugh or even a reaction,
right.
They don't have to get a laugh. If somebody goes, oh my God, like I know it.
Yeah.
It gets it out and it's in like, it's my way of counseling myself.
Yeah.
So
you have to.
Well, that's the reason we got into the podcast was me seeing an Instagram of Bobby doing his way of dealing with the tools that he had. So we've been working on, I just texted him one day and I was like, we need to do a podcast about this. And he's like, what do you know about podcasts? I was like, nothing, but we'll find out.
No, you guys are leading me
through. We're both learning as we go. So
yeah,
you guys are helping me through this.
But I can talk.
That's awesome.
You want to plug your socials before we go?
Oh, sure. Sure. Why not? Like on Instagram, actually the Bluegrass Muse, it was a name kind of that I kind of came up with a few years back. And when I started modeling and things like that and started doing more of my self-love projects and my creative work. So you can find me on the Instagrams at Bluegrass_Muse. And then I am on Facebook as well. I post a lot of things through that in there as well. But I'm Samantha Bay. So that's the legal name these days. So I'm sticking to it. Here at Sarasota Bay is right here. And I actually lived on a boat for a while. So doing pirate things in the Bay during COVID, I got the nickname and it just stuck. So I'm the Lady Pirate, Lady Bay. That's it. So I go by Lady Bay more these days, but the Bluegrass Muse is still where you'll find all my stuff on social media.
And I just want to say before we go, it's been really weird calling you Samantha this whole
I know. But you can call me Sam. It's fine. Like people.
Yeah, but if I start calling you Sam, then everybody else starts calling you Sam, and I'll call you Sam when we're just talking.
Okay. Yes, I got you. I know. Right. I was Sam once upon a when, but now.
Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Now I'm.
But that's like if we just reconnected, and I said no, I'm not Bobby anymore. I'm Bert. You'd be like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's
like
true.
No.
Oh no!
I thought it was Sugar Biscuit.
It's Sugar Biscuits is my elf name.
Your elf name? Oh,
my elf name is Sugar Biscuits.
That's the full-time name right now, Elfie.
I like it. That sounds like one of those elves on the shelf.
I think that's going to be my stage name when I do comedy.
Sugar Biscuits. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And everybody, just remember.
You are not broken. And with all of us here, you're not alone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.